Hey guys, today we're going to learn how to divide fractions. Now for your Australian Year 7 maths curriculum, you need to know this. And if you watch this video through to the end and are able to do everything that I show you here today, you'll be able to get an A. In this video, we're going to go through 3 stages, okay? First, we're going to go over everything we know already about fractions. Then we're going to go over in great detail how to divide fractions and the process. And thirdly, we're going to go over some example questions together, okay? So let's get started. What we already know about fractions. Now, the top half of the fraction is called the numerator and the bottom half of the fraction is called the denominator. And there's a lot of ways of saying how a fraction is. There's over, there's divided by, there's in parts. There's lots of ways, but it means this many divided by this many. And that's all you need to know about fractions. Now let's go over how we divide fractions. It's pretty simple. There's 3 steps. First, we're going to multiply the denominator of the second fraction by the numerator of the first fraction. And then second step, numerator of the second fraction, or the top of it, by the bottom of the first fraction, or the denominator of the first fraction. And then our third step, once we've done that, is that we'll simplify the fraction. So let's take a look at how we multiply this by this and this by this. So the denominator of the second fraction will multiply the numerator of the first fraction, and that will go on the numerator of our answer. So 2 by 7, that's 14. And second, the numerator of the second fraction will multiply it by the denominator of the first fraction. So 1 by 6, that is 6. But we need to take one further step. We need to simplify. So can we simplify 14 over 6? Now, they're both even numbers, so we can look at 2 as a factor. So let's divide both the top and bottom by 2. And now when we do that, we're not changing the value of the fraction. We're only changing how it visually looks. Because if you divide the top and the bottom by the same number, it doesn't change value. So let's take a look here. We'll divide 14 by 2 and we'll divide 6 by 2. So 14 divided 2 is 7. 6 divided 2 is 3. So that is our answer because both of those numbers are prime, so we can't simplify any further. All right, let's go through 3 practice questions. Our first practice question will be 8 over 5 divided by 2 over 5. So let's first multiply the numerator of the first fraction by the denominator of the second fraction. So 8 times 5, we get 40. And now let's multiply the denominator of the first fraction by the numerator of the second. 5 times 2, that's 10. So now we have an answer, but remember, we have to simplify. If we don't simplify, we're not going to get that A, okay? So now we've got an answer, but we're not going to get an A if we don't simplify. So we have to simplify this fraction. Now, can you find 2 common factors in 40 and 10? Now, before we went over 2, which would work here because they're both even, we could also even do 5 would work, but there's a much clearer, much better factor to start with, and that's going to be 10, because they both end in zeros, they're both divisible by 10. So let's try that. If we divide 40 by 10, we're going to get 4. And if we divide 10 by 10, we're going to get 1. So now we have 4 over 1, or 4 divided by 1, which will just be 4. So we're going to write equals 4. And there we have it. That's our first question. Let's go on to the next one. Here we have 3 over 2 divided by 4 over 8. So remember, this by this by this. Numerator of the first fraction times by the denominator of the second fraction. So what does it get us? 3 times 8, that's 24. So now we do this and this. So we multiply the denominator of the first fraction by the numerator of the second fraction. 2 by 4, that's 8. 24 over 8. Now, remember, that is our answer, but we have to simplify to get that A. So can you think of any factors shared by 24 and 8? Now they're both even, but we can go a step further than that. If you remember your times tables, 8 by 3 is 24. So they share a common factor of 8. So let's divide the top and bottom, the numerator and the denominator, by 8. And let's see what we get. 24 divided 8 is 3. 8 divided 8 is 1. So we get 3 over 1. And 3 over 1 is another way of saying 3 divided by 1. So anything divided by itself is just itself. 3 over 1 is equal to 3. And there you have it. Now let's go over our last question. This one's going to be a little bit more tricky. Here we have it, our last question, 34 over 78 divided by 17 over 36. Now this is going to be super easy because we're just going to follow our steps, okay? So top of our first fraction times by the bottom of our second fraction, 34 by 36. That's going to be 1,228. I used a calculator for that, I won't lie. Now we're going to do the bottom of our first fraction multiplied by the top of our second fraction, or our first fraction's denominator by our second fraction's numerator. So we're going to do 78 by 17. I'm also going to use a calculator for this. And that's 1,326. And now I would not expect anyone in year 7 to be able to simplify this fraction just in their head. And now you may be asking, hey Ben, why are we dividing fractions manually instead of just putting it in our calculator if we're going to be doing this multiplication in a calculator? Now, if you put this into a calculator, you're not going to get this as your answer, okay? You're just going to get a whole bunch of digits, and why we do this is this shows your understanding, okay? So if you follow this procedure, you do it the way I did, you should be able to get an A in your Australian maths curriculum for year 7. So let's go over everything one more time, right? So we start with two fractions, and we have a numerator and a denominator, a numerator and a denominator. Now our first numerator will be multiplied by our second denominator, this by this, and then that goes on to the numerator of our answer. And then we multiply the denominator of our first fraction and multiply it by the numerator of our second fraction, and that becomes the denominator of our answer. Then we take one more step and we simplify it. Now in this one we couldn't simplify, but in those other two we got super nice answers. So you should be able to find ones like those. If you learned anything in this video, please leave me a like, and if you have any questions or want to ask me for a video on something else, please leave that in the comments. Thanks for watching. Bye.